Welcome back. How long have you been watching my channel? Let me know below.
They raised their glasses like they were in a goddamn Hallmark movie. Smiles all around, expensive wine glistening under the chandelier, laughter bubbling at the corners of the room like everything was just perfect. And then Dad, in that annoyingly firm and calculated tone of his, said the words I'd heard in my nightmares more than I care to admit. To Emily, the child who made us proud. There it was, the sentence that wrapped up nearly 4 decades of subtle rejection in one neat, sparkling sentence. And just like that, I smiled, a wide, hollow, razor-edged smile, stood up, gathered the empty plates with practiced grace, and walked into the kitchen without a single word. No yelling, no slamming doors, just silence, clean and surgical, like a cut that doesn't bleed right away. The room behind me kept buzzing. Or maybe it was just in my ears. That high-pitched hum you get when something inside you finally snaps, but so quietly no one notices. I rinsed the plates, wiped down the counter, stacked the silverware like a waitress on autopilot, and I swear I could feel Mom's eyes on my back. But she didn't say a thing. Not a damn word. I didn't expect her to. She hadn't in years. Later that night, after the dinner was done and I disappeared without saying goodbye, I got the message from Emily. It popped up on my screen at exactly 11:12 p.m., like a nail tapped gently into the wall of my piece. "What did you do? Mom won't stop crying." I stared at it, read it twice, 3 times, and for the first time in years, I laughed. Not a loud, wild laugh, just a quiet, bitter exhale with teeth. It wasn't funny, it was pathetic. But somehow, it felt good. Let me take you back for a second, because I know what you're thinking. What could possibly be so bad about a little toast? Families do this all the time, right? Parents pick favorites, we roll our eyes, we joke about it, but here's the thing. When the toast comes after years of being invisible, when it lands like the final confirmation that you were never even in the running, it doesn't feel like a compliment to someone else. It feels like a funeral for what you hoped your relationship could have been. It's funny how you learn to live with it. I did. For years, I laughed when Emily got the spotlight. I played along when Mom told her she looked stunning, even when her lipstick was smeared, and she reeked of whatever perfume they market to women who cheat on their husbands at charity events. I clapped when Dad told stories about Emily's career, her charity work, her perfect little suburban marriage. And no one noticed that I hadn't mentioned my job in, 5 Thanksgivings. Hell, I could have told them I was president of Mars, and they'd still turn back to Emily within 30 seconds. The truth is, when they toasted her that night, it wasn't the first time, but it was the first time I let it land, really land, in my gut. Something about the way Dad said it, so clear and final, made me realize they weren't just proud of her. They were proud that I wasn't her. They were proud they had one daughter they could put on display, and one they could quietly ignore. A perfect balance in their broken little system. And the worst part? Emily knew. Oh, she absolutely knew. She smiled when they said it, lowered her lashes like she was embarrassed, played the role like a damn Oscar winner. But she glanced at me, just once. And in that glance, there was a flicker of something that didn't fit. Something sharp, calculating. She wasn't embarrassed. She was enjoying it. She always had. So when I stood up and cleared the table, when I left without saying goodbye, when I didn't even look back, I wasn't just walking out of the room. I was walking out of the role I'd been cast in for nearly 40 years. The quiet daughter, the extra chair, the one who keeps the peace. I walked out of that house like I was burning a script I never wrote, but had been forced to memorize. Here's a question for you. Have you ever been at a family gathering, looked around, and realized you could vanish mid-meal and no one would really notice until the dessert came out? Like your presence is appreciated but not essential? That's how it's been for me since high school. I could be charming, funny, successful. Didn't matter. Emily always shined brighter. Not because she was better, because they decided she was. So what did I do that night? Nothing violent, nothing loud. I didn't flip the table or spill the wine or scream at the sky, but I did something small, something only Emily could notice at first. and something my mother would feel deeply hours later. Something that wouldn't go away with a tissue and a glass of water. I planted a truth where it would hurt the most, and I didn't stay to watch it grow. I just left. That message from Emily, it was just the beginning. But what she didn't understand, what none of them understood, is that I hadn't ruined the family that night. I had only handed them a mirror, and for the first time, they were finally seeing the cracks. And honestly, I was just getting started. Growing up in our house felt less like being part of a family, and more like being a background actor in someone else's film, where the lines were already written, the roles already cast, and the spotlight, predictably, unfailingly, belonged to Emily. It wasn't always so obvious, at least not in the beginning, when we were both kids with scraped knees and matching backpacks. But looking back now with the clarity that only time and distance can bring, I see it clearly. The tiny shifts, the subtle preferences, the way a room tilted in her direction whenever she entered, as though the gravitational pull of her perfection left no space for anything else. I remember birthday parties where I blew out candles under Mom's distracted smile because Emily had a recital the next day, and everyone was too preoccupied to notice I'd made my own cake from a box. I remember school plays where my name was listed in the program, yes, but my parents arrived late and left early, always citing traffic or work, or Emily's debate team needing a ride home. It was never malicious, not overtly, which made it worse in a way, because it wasn't hatred or cruelty I faced. Just a suffocating kind of indifference, the kind that doesn't raise its voice, but makes you feel like a ghost walking through your own home. Dad, in particular, had a way of making disappointment feel like an art form, mastered over years of quietly comparing my choices to Emily's triumphs without ever saying the words aloud. When I got into a decent college on a partial scholarship, he nodded once, said good job, and moved on. When Emily got a full ride to a prestigious university, complete with interviews and newspaper clippings and alumni handshakes, he threw her a party with rented linens and a champagne toast. That was the first time I remember feeling it for real, the split, the moment I stopped being their daughter and started being the other one, the one who wasn't quite enough. But I didn't complain. I played my part. I smiled at the right times, clapped when I was supposed to, made myself small enough to fit into the spaces they left me. That's how you survive in families like ours. Not by fighting for attention, but by learning to need less of it. Emily, of course, knew exactly how to thrive in that environment. She wasn't just good at things. She was brilliant at being seen. Her accomplishments always came with a photo op, a story to tell at dinner parties, a reason for Mom to beam and Dad to pretend like he'd somehow orchestrated it all. And yet, for all her perfection, there were cracks, little moments when her mask slipped, and I saw something colder behind her smile, something that knew exactly how high she'd climbed and exactly who she'd stepped over to get there. There was one night, years ago, when that truth almost broke the surface. I was 27, freshly divorced from a man who made me feel just invisible enough to feel familiar. And Emily had just gotten engaged to Mark. Golden boy, financial advisor, the kind of man who shook hands too firmly and called waiters boss. We were sitting in Mom's kitchen, sipping cheap white wine out of chipped glasses because the good set was only for company. And Emily, in an uncharacteristic moment of loosened tongue, let it slip. A story about a mistake, a night that never happened, a name that wasn't Mark's. Her words were soft, cautious, but I caught them. I always did. She laughed it off before I could ask questions, but I didn't need to. Her eyes told me everything. And for a brief second, I thought, this is it, the moment the pedestal crumbles, but nothing happened. I said nothing. And she thanked me for my silence the next day, without ever using those exact words, just a hug that lingered too long and a look that said, you owe me, remember that. I carried that secret like a hot coal, buried deep, burning silently through years of family dinners and fake smiles, through every holiday where Mark sat beside her with his arm draped around her shoulders like ownership. And I thought, maybe that's my place. The vault, the quiet keeper of what shouldn't be said. Until the toast. until that damn toast shattered whatever was left of my patience and made me realize I didn't owe them my silence anymore. Because that night at dinner, when they toasted to Emily, it wasn't just an insult. It was a confirmation, a seal on a lifetime of being overlooked. And suddenly everything I had buried, the secret, the anger, the years of standing in the wings, surged forward like a tide I couldn't hold back. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse. But inside, something clicked into place. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I wasn't going to play the understudy in a life that was mine to begin with. They raised their glasses to Emily. I raised something else. A memory, a truth, a single quiet act that would ripple through the fabric of our family until the seams came undone. And as I looked around that table, at Dad's smug face, at Mom's rehearsed pride, at Emily's polished mask, I knew this time they wouldn't forget me, because ghosts can haunt. And I was done being silent. It's strange, isn't it, how some truths don't hit like a slap, but settle in like a bruise. Dark, quiet, growing in the shadows until you almost forget what the skin looked like before it turned purple. That's how it was with Emily's secret. It didn't scream, it didn't demand attention, it just sat there in the back of my mind like a ticking clock, reminding me that one day I could let it speak. And that thought, that quiet promise, was the only thing that kept me steady. Through the years, where I smiled at her wedding, stood behind her in family photos, and listened as Mom told strangers at church how proud she was of her perfect daughters, though we both knew she only meant one. The truth had a name, and that name was Kyle. And no, he wasn't some mystery man from a bar, or a forgotten fling from college. He was worse, far worse. Kyle was Mark's younger brother. Yes, the same Mark who married Emily in a vineyard wedding so perfectly staged, it looked like a catalog shoot. The same Mark who gave her the life Mom always dreamed one of us would have, complete with a 2-story house in the suburbs, a golden retriever named Murphy, and Christmas cards that looked like they'd been curated by a graphic designer on retainer. And Kyle? Kyle was the mistake Emily made one night when she was confused and lonely. Her words, not mine, during a rough patch in their engagement that no one was supposed to know about. No one except me. I didn't ask to know. That part's important. She came to me. It was late, I remember, because I was still living in that tiny 1-bedroom apartment with the squeaky floors and the leaky kitchen faucet that I never got around to fixing. She showed up at my door in tears, mascara smeared, hands shaking, and for a moment I thought maybe something had happened to Mom or Dad. But no, it was about her. It was always about her. She sat on my old futon with her perfect life cracking in her hands like porcelain. And she told me the story in pieces, halting, dramatic, like a confessional in a soap opera, pausing now and then for my reaction, as if I'd gasp or cry or reach out and hold her. But I just listened, silently, storing it all away like evidence. She said Kyle had kissed her at a party, said she tried to stop it but didn't, said it went too far but she didn't know how to make it stop, said it was a mistake, a single, stupid night. But her eyes didn't look sorry, they looked panicked. Not with guilt, but with fear that it might get out, that someone else might know, someone who could take it all away. That someone, of course, was me. She made me promise I wouldn't say anything. She cried into her hands and told me she couldn't lose Mark, couldn't lose the life they were building, couldn't live with herself if Mom and Dad found out. And so, like the good sister I had trained myself to be, I promised. But inside, something shifted. Because in that moment, I realized she didn't come to me because she trusted me, or because she thought I could help. She came to me because she knew I wouldn't tell. She knew I was safe, predictable, harmless. I was the vault she could throw her filth into and walk away without ever getting her hands dirty. And I let her. For years, I let her. Every family gathering, every anniversary party, every phone call where Mom gushed about how Emily finally found the right man. I swallowed that truth like poison. I watched her play the part, watched Mark dote on her, watched Kyle smile across the table like he hadn't fucked his brother's fiancée in a guest bathroom during a summer fundraiser. I smiled through it all, because I knew that secrets, like bruises, don't stay buried forever. They either fade or they surface. And I wasn't ready to let this one fade. So when I sat at that dinner and I heard Dad raise his glass with that smug pride in his voice, praising the child who made them proud, I knew the time had come. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need a scene. All I needed was a whisper and something they'd remember long after the wine wore off. Emily didn't see it coming. That's the best part. She thought I was still that same quiet little sister, the one who would clear the table while she soaked in the applause, the one who never spoke unless spoken to. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already put the pieces in place. During dinner, while everyone was laughing about some story Mom had dragged out of the archives, something about Emily rescuing a bird in 3rd grade, I slipped my phone into my purse and tapped out a quick message. It wasn't long, just enough to plant doubt. Just enough to remind Kyle that I knew, and then, like magic, I watched him shift in his seat, watch him glance at Emily, watch her catch his eye and suddenly fumble her fork. It was delicious. Later, while I was helping in the kitchen, I placed a folded photo, one Emily had left in my apartment years ago, back when she still trusted me to hold her skeletons, under Mom's wine glass. It was faded now, but the date stamp was clear. A photo of Emily, not quite dressed for winter, in the arms of someone who sure as hell wasn't her fiancé. I knew Mom would look at it, knew she'd recognize the room, knew she'd pretend not to for the sake of the evening, but it would haunt her. Because Mom's pride in Emily wasn't just emotional, it was conditional, it was fragile. And I had just poked a hole in it. I didn't stick around for dessert. Didn't wait for the questions. I walked out the front door and into the night air like I was finally walking free of something I didn't even realize I'd been chained to. And when that message came from Emily, "What did you do?" I knew the real answer wasn't what I did. It was what I unleashed. There's a particular kind of satisfaction that doesn't come with loud applause or dramatic exits, but with the silent recognition that you've finally taken back control in a world that insisted you didn't have any to begin with. And that satisfaction, the kind that builds slowly like steam behind a sealed lid, was exactly what I felt in the hours after I left that dinner table. I wasn't trembling, I wasn't pacing or second-guessing myself, and I certainly wasn't feeling guilt. Because what I'd done, or more precisely, what I'd set in motion, wasn't the act of a bitter woman seeking chaos for its own sake, but a deliberate, calculated response to years of being expected to shrink myself to fit the corners of a family that never once asked what it cost me to keep the peace. For context, you need to understand that I didn't spend months plotting revenge like some soap opera villain scribbling in a notebook under candlelight. No, the idea came naturally, as easily as a breath you've been holding your whole life, and finally, instinctively, decide to release. It started days before the dinner when Mom, in her usual clipped and cheerful voice, asked if I'd be coming to celebrate Emily's new business grant. One more accolade for the growing shrine. And whether I'd mind bringing dessert because, of course, you make the best pies, honey, which in her language meant do something useful and don't expect to be noticed. I agreed, but not because I cared about the event or the fake smiles. I agreed because I'd already made a decision. This time, I wasn't going to be invisible. I wasn't going to be gracious. I was going to leave a mark. It began with the photo, a blurry but damning snapshot from years ago, one Emily had casually left behind during one of her wine-soaked confessionals in my apartment, back when she still thought I was harmless. I had kept it, not because I planned to use it, but because it reminded me who she really was beneath the polished exterior and carefully curated life. But I didn't stop at the photo. I printed a copy of an email chain, forwarded from Kyle months ago during one of his drunk, guilt-laced spirals, where he begged her to come clean, told her he couldn't look his brother in the eye anymore, said the guilt was eating him alive. I never responded. I just saved it, tucked it away like a loaded gun in a drawer I hoped I'd never open. But now, standing in my apartment 2 days before the dinner, I knew it was time. I printed the emails, folded them neatly, and slid them into an unmarked envelope. not addressed to anyone, no handwriting, just anonymous, sterile truth. And as I packed the dessert Mom asked for, 2 store-bought pies I passed off as homemade with a sprinkle of cinnamon, I placed the envelope at the bottom of the bag, beneath a folded napkin, knowing exactly when and where I'd slide it under Mom's plate. The second move was even quieter. During dinner, while laughter echoed off the polished walls, and Emily told stories of her latest philanthropic endeavor, a phrase she used so often I started to think she didn't even remember what it meant, I caught Kyle's eye. He was tense, drinking too fast, checking his phone like he expected bad news, and I realized he was still scared I might one day tell someone. So I told him, in the most polite and unassuming way possible. I waited until everyone was distracted, leaned across the table as I poured myself a second glass of wine, and said, in a voice low enough for only him to hear, "I think about that night sometimes, the one you and Emily shared. It must be hard keeping it from Mark, especially when he trusts you so much." He didn't respond, just stared at me, pale, blinking too fast. I smiled, nodded, and turned my attention back to my plate as though we'd been talking about the weather. That's all it took. A single sentence, a single well-placed reminder that I could shatter everything if I wanted to. And I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to accuse. I just had to nudge the first domino. After dinner, while Mom fussed with the coffee cups and Emily floated from room to room like a hostess on a talk show, I helped in the kitchen. That's when I slipped the envelope under her wine glass. She didn't see it at first. I made sure of that. But when I left, when I gathered my coat, thanked them politely, and walked out the door without saying goodbye, I knew she'd find it. I knew her curiosity would get the better of her. And I knew once she opened it, she'd understand exactly what I'd done. Later that night, I muted my phone, let the messages roll in. Emily's was first, then another from Kyle, and finally one from Mom. Not angry, not confused, just 5 words that told me everything. "How long have you known?" I didn't reply. What could I say? That I'd always known? That I'd known and kept quiet because I thought that's what family did. Protect each other, even when they didn't deserve it? That I'd let them paint me into the corner for so long I forgot I could step out of it? What I did that night wasn't explosive. It wasn't messy or cruel. It was precise, surgical, the kind of revenge that doesn't scream. It whispers. And the echo of that whisper, I knew, would be louder than any confrontation ever could be. Because once a secret is out, you can't put it back. And now they all had to sit with it. Not just the truth about Emily, but the truth about themselves. About the roles they forced me into. The silence they expected me to maintain. The way they mistook compliance for weakness. They would have to sit in the discomfort, in the rot they'd ignored for so long, and wonder how they never saw it coming. And me? I slept better that night than I had in years. There's a kind of silence that arrives not when everything calms down, but when everything ruptures so profoundly that the noise stops because it has nowhere else to go. The air is too thick with disbelief, too charged with realization, and no one quite knows who they are anymore once the mask slips and the roles they've clung to for decades collapse under the weight of a truth too long ignored. That was the silence I stepped into the morning after the dinner, the kind of stillness that doesn't offer peace, but a sort of suspended reckoning. And as I stood by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sky dull into gray, I knew that the consequences I had unleashed were not only inevitable, but far overdue. It didn't take long before the aftershocks began. Not dramatic confrontations, no slamming doors or dramatic breakdowns, caught on video for social media consumption, but something much more insidious, more revealing. The unraveling started in whispers, in rumors that began inside the family group chat, and then leaked out into the wider circle of relatives like a slow spreading oil stain. Emily went quiet for 2 days, which, for someone who usually updates her Instagram story with the frequency of a stock ticker, was practically an emergency broadcast. When she finally resurfaced, her posts were sterile, curated, and deeply off, as if she were trying too hard to prove that nothing had changed, as if the cracks weren't already spidering across the flawless glass of her image. But I knew better, because Mark called me. It was a short call, just under 3 minutes, and he didn't yell or accuse or ask why I did what I did. Instead, his voice was low, tight, and brimming with a kind of hurt that didn't sound rehearsed. The kind of hurt that comes when the floor under your life gives way and you're left clawing at the pieces, unsure which ones to even try saving. He asked only one question. "How long have you known?" And I, without hesitation, answered him with the truth. "Since before you married her." There was a pause, not long, but deep, and in that breath of silence, I could feel something shift. He didn't thank me, didn't curse me, didn't hang up. He just said, "I guess I should have seen it." And then the line went dead. That's when I knew it had landed. Emily, predictably, tried damage control. She called me 3 times, each attempt more desperate than the last. And when I didn't answer, she texted a novel's worth of explanations, justifications, and half-baked apologies, disguised as accusations. According to her, I had overstepped, misunderstood, destroyed something that wasn't mine to touch, as if the truth was only hers to reveal, as if I hadn't spent half a lifetime protecting her from herself, while being crushed under the weight of her secrets. Her final message read, "You just wanted to see me fall," and maybe on some level that was true, but not out of spite, not out of envy. I wanted her to fall because it was the only way anyone would ever look up and see that I had been there the whole damn time, standing in her shadow, holding up the parts of her life she didn't have the courage to face. But what I didn't expect, what caught me off guard in a way nothing else had, was Mom's reaction. The woman who had spent nearly 4 decades building a narrative around Emily's brilliance and my supposed mediocrity. The woman who never failed to correct my tone or redirect a compliment meant for me back to her favorite. Didn't call to scold or deny or spin. She sent me an email, just text. No greeting, no signature. Just the words, "I don't know who you are anymore," followed by a second line, "Maybe I never did." And that, strangely, hit harder than I thought it would, not because I craved her approval. That ship had long since sunk, but because it proved that in her mind, I had finally stepped outside the box she'd placed me in, and she didn't know what to do with the version of me that wasn't quiet, accommodating, and invisible. Dad never reached out. Typical. Silence was always his favorite language. I imagine he blamed me for disrupting the family image, for daring to bring discomfort into a system he had mastered by pretending nothing was ever wrong. His pride, once so tangible it could smother a room, would now be bruised beyond repair, not because I lied or manipulated, but because I told the truth, and that was a sin far worse in his world. And yet, with all the fallout, all the broken pieces and exposed nerves, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no glee, no celebration, no cinematic moment of victory, where I walked away into the sunset with vindication pumping through my veins. Instead, I felt emptied. Not hollow, but emptied, like a room finally cleared of clutter. There was space now. Space for something else, something real, something of my own making. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to an old voicemail I hadn't deleted, one of the few I kept from the early days after my divorce, when Dad had left a message in that same flat voice of his, trying to sound supportive but managing only to convey disappointment. "We just didn't know how to raise someone like you," he had said, as if I were a malfunction, a glitch in the perfect daughter matrix. I replayed it twice, and this time, instead of feeling that familiar sting of rejection, I heard it for what it was. Not an indictment of me, but a confession of their failure. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the revenge wasn't in the exposure or the fallout or the silence that followed. Maybe the real victory was simply in refusing to play the part anymore, in standing up and walking out without raising my voice, in making them see, finally, that I was never the one who needed fixing. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't scream or slam doors. I simply handed them a mirror and left before they could toss it back at me. Now the family exists in fragments. Group chats left unread, phone calls unanswered, holidays spoken about in hypotheticals. The image is broken, and no one quite knows how to sweep up the shards without cutting themselves. And me, I'm still here. Still quiet, but no longer silent. Still standing, but no longer shrinking. Because the truth once spoken doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. It just needs to be undeniable.